Hello, Barbara Nixon here, and welcome to another episode of Lessons from Leaders. Now, today I'm really excited to be introducing and speaking to Erica Wexler. Now, Erica is a kindred spirit, and she's based at the other side of the pond to me, but I so enjoy talking to her and discussing all things leadership, because she's the founder and CEO of Erica Wexler Transforms LLC and creator of the Transformational Guidance Training Program. She is a pragmatically optimistic change facilitator who takes a collaborative systems and design thinking approach to project management, training, and professional coaching. Her substantial experience facilitating positive and necessary change throughout her 25-year career includes work within governments, business, non-profit, and the educational sectors. Her leadership approach is also informed by her work as an inner city educator and behavioural support provider. Now, Erica earned her Master's in Organisational Dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania. She holds certificates in Organisational Leadership and Change Management and is an accredited LIFO trainer licensee in executive coaching. I know that you're going to get loads of top tips from this conversation, so get comfy and get your pen and paper ready, and let's dive in. Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really pleased. So, just to kick us off then, tell me a little bit more about what you do now, but also I'm more interested in how you got to where you are today.
So thank you so much for having me today, Barbara. This is so exciting, and I love to talk a bit about my origin story, as well as why I'm doing the work that I do and helping people develop their own leadership skills. So I realized a long time ago that one of my biggest passions was to help people really to see and to understand and to believe in the specialized gifts and talents that they bring to the world. And then figuring out what they do with those then to have the impact that they want to have to facilitate that positive necessary change. And my own story as a leader has taken so many different layers of it over time. Who the people are who I've needed to go to support to, the coaches I've worked with, the environments and the organizations that really bring out the sides of me that I want to spend the most time with, and then being able to help some of those strategies for other people who are either developing their leadership skills or navigating a significant change later in their career, and then how to do that with authenticity and with groundedness and with just a level of understanding a sense of self so that they're not only serving themselves but others, and then landing in that alignment. So my own story along the way had some bumps, and I began realizing that there had to be a way of doing things differently, not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, just differently to have a bigger impact. So I began tapping into my own skills and my own strengths and what is it that I do and what is it the impact I want to have. And through that came some strategies that I'm now able to use to help other people, individuals, teams, organizations, really facilitate that positive and necessary change.
Fantastic. So it's very similar to myself, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, because we're in the same space.
Yes,
it's great to get a different insight, and just to experience and understand somebody else's journey, so that we can learn from that. So how did you start? How did you find that you had this passion, and where did it? Tell me more about your story then.
So I think part of it came from the story for me about what wasn't working. When I found myself looking around in environments where I wasn't supported, or when I wasn't necessarily getting the messages about what my skills were and how I could use them appropriately. And I also had a few failures. So I was given tasks to do, or I had some work that I did that didn't have the right outcomes. And I realized that if I was going to really facilitate change, I needed to build up my skills in a different way. So I began first looking at what I was contributing to the situations that were creating things that weren't working, either the relationships that weren't serving me or weren't helping us work within companies or organizations or in my personal life, and then really thinking through the story of what I needed to do from there. So I was fortunate enough in my career path to start in education. And I began thinking about how to facilitate change for those students in educational environments who may or may not have had the access to the resources that would allow them to see what their gifts are and what their opportunities were. So I spent some time in the educational arena for a number of years, helping to facilitate that change on those levels and bringing in programs. And then from there, it led into me working within the behavioral health world for quite a while. And I learned a very different way of communicating with people about really working on what specialized skills and development meant and helping people take on that growth mindset, regardless of where their starting point is helping them to figure out what they could do differently or what they could do next and what the opportunities were with who they were. So getting a chance to see what was happening in both educational settings as well as in the developmental disability world, and then translating it into large-scale systems change got really powerful. And that's where I tapped into the change management and leadership development work through my graduate work and really began thinking about the impact that people have in terms of facilitating change. And I began to realize really quickly that it really has to start with yourself. So I started a lot with my own path about aligning my thoughts and my words and my actions and paying attention to where the disconnects were and then leaning into where that needed to be changed. And that's one of the things now that I love to get to do for the individuals that I coach or the teams that I work with or the companies that I'm doing training for in terms of that same thing. Where are things aligned as a starting point? But then where are the areas where there's misalignment, where there's opportunities for training or doing things a little differently?
It's very close to my heart. So although our journeys and our backgrounds are very different, because I started out in retail, not education, we got to the same place, which is fantastic, isn't it? Was there a significant point for you where you thought, actually, I am on the right track here, this feels right? Did something, did you feel that? Did something happen?
I did. So in 2015, I had some moments where I had to step away from the organization that I was working with. It was one that I cared a lot about, and I'd helped create. But my mom had gotten sick. So I stepped away and I ended up living in a completely different part of the country for a few months and having to work very differently from a geographic region where I wasn't normally. And I came back and realized that I just wasn't satisfied with the work I was doing and what I was doing and where I was doing it, and something needed to change. And that moment of hitting, I didn't know what home felt like for me. I wasn't sure what kind of work I wanted to do. And that year was when I started working with my own coaches and my own work and figuring out, but what is it that I do? Like, who am I that makes me different from what everybody else that looks like what I'm doing on paper is doing? And I'd done some coaching work of my own within my graduate work. I'd been doing stuff with teams, I've been doing stuff with organizations, and it was starting to have a difference. But it just was that level of dissatisfaction of, I know that I'm designed for something different. And then how do I tap, what is that? So finding a different way where I wasn't moving or picking up because I was just going to take my disconnect, my discomfort with me. So how did I stay put and figure out how to shift that internally and then start working differently externally? And that really was the year that I launched things very, very differently, created my company, created my story, really began to tap into working with people differently and applying it. So that was the year when I came back and I was like, life is too short.
Yeah.
And I'm not satisfied. So how do I engage differently?
Yeah. And it's so important because, again, I had a very similar experience where I had to just delve deep into what it was that made me tick and what I did. And you said something that really resonated with me, Erica, when you said, I'm not satisfied. Something in you that's saying, actually, I'm here for more, or something just doesn't fit or feel right. So what is it and what can I fix? And that, you don't have to be in the personal development arena to do that. Most people feel like that at some point or another. So what work did you do? I know that's probably a massive question, but what work did you do during that year to really delve deep into what it was that was burning inside of you?
So a lot of the work that I did is now what I've developed into the program I do now, which is I really took some time to think about what are those characteristics that I bring to an environment, whatever environment I step into, that is really the essence of who I am. So there are those concrete skills, right? Making that list of my concrete skills, my background, what were the skills that I needed to be able to do the kind of work I wanted to do in those environments, and identifying where the educational opportunities were to close that gap beyond my graduate work. I'd already graduated at that point, and what did I want to do next? But more importantly, the characteristics of who I am. So things like I have this amazing ability to stretch time, and I am very compassionate. I have a sense of humor that I can bring to an environment. I really can look at the big picture as well as be very detail oriented at the same time and help people connect it. I can draw themes from lots of different, messiness like this and find the places where things are connected. So lots of those things. So I mean, lots and lots of lists about that. And then I began thinking about which of those characteristics really guided me. And I did a bunch of work. So I worked with a coach on different pieces. I did a lot of work with Brene Brown and her Daring Greatly and her online courses about really tapping into who we are and what is it we need to do to let go of things that might be holding us back. All of those stories that we have running in our reels, right? The shame stories, the I'm not good enough stories, all of those kind of pieces. So I identified for myself what my story reels were and then figured out how to replace those story reels with something different, with different affirmations, with different self-talk, with different self-shoulds that are releasing all that stuff so that I could really step into what I was designed for with a lot more flexibility and flow.
So once you've done all that work, because it's a lot of work, it's
a lot of work.
It is a lot. Yeah. We kind of brushed over it in 2 minutes, but in that year, it took you a year, did it?
I would say it took longer than that. That was the year it started. I would say it's taken since then, those last 3 years, I've been leaning in on a bigger and bigger scale so that now, I work with different coaches, I work with different business people, I put myself in environments that were very uncomfortable. I had the fortune of going through some situations that were harder to deal with so that I could see how I navigated those things and gain more tools out of it. So I began really just putting myself out there and seeking opportunities that weren't as comfortable so I could stretch. And then I began talking to a lot of other people who were doing the work and seeing what they were doing and where the trends were and just paying attention to which things I was offering were sticking. Yeah. A lot of patience in the process, but definitely not just 1 year.
Absolutely. And it's never ending, is it?
No, it's never ending.
People say to me, once we've done it, it's done. No, once you've done it, started, you've just started the process. So
that's right.
But what I find interesting is that you really leaned into that process because it's so easy, isn't it, to resist it and to just run away and not experience it. So feel that discomfort and just ignore it. I'm trying to look for the word. What the word I'm looking for? Just retract, really. And
well, play it safe.
Yeah, absolutely safe.
It's really easy to stay like this, but when you start to play and get more comfortable with that feeling that happens inside, where you're just like, this, I'm going to have to make a change because I'm either purposefully going to choose to stay stuck or choose with mediocre or just choose the safe way of doing it, or I'm just going to go and lean all in.
Absolutely. And be okay with the discomfort. And
yes. And the failures that come with it. Definitely. Because not everything's going to work.
Yeah, no, everything's going to work. Yeah, one of the things that I talk about is just experiment. It takes the pressure off a little bit and just, use it as an experiment and delve in and get used to that feeling of discomfort. But you did that and then some, so during that, I know you started the experience in, that year, 2016, did you say?
Well, I would say that I started a lot sooner than that. I started asking questions about how to do things differently, probably 2005, 2006, when I began looking at what was around me that was different and things that weren't satisfying. But then it just all led into one bigger thing, so that in 2015, what happened that year was just a significant awareness that I just wasn't happy and satisfied looking around with what was going on. And I felt like there just had to be something more. There had to be something different. Yeah. And so that was where I really began thinking about what I wanted to offer and, created a website and began thinking about what is it that I want to offer to say through my speaking and through my leadership. And so I began for the first time that year. So it was actually interesting because what happened around that same year that I hadn't thought about until you just asked that question differently is that I was speaking to someone. I was traveling in Boston and working with some colleagues. And I realized we were talking about, my communication strategies or what I did with coaching or what I did with, organizational change management. And I was talking about, my processes and my methodology and the communication pieces. And then we all went to lunch and we were just, chatting. And then she asked me some different questions and I began talking about my dance and my conscious dance practice and my movement and my hiking and all the things I did. And she said, holy cow, if I hadn't just
You've frozen, Erica. Can you still hear me?
your energy and what you're doing with leadership are disconnected. I can. Oh, did you lose me?
I lost you. I got you.
Okay.
Yeah, you froze
Uh-oh.
at. It's all right. You froze at. She said, "Holy cow! If I had
Okay.
seen that." So, do you want to pick it up from there? Sorry.
Yes. Yes. So we were talking, as I said, we were talking about, my concrete pieces and my work and my research, et cetera. And then I began talking about my dance practice. And she said, holy cow, if I hadn't seen that, I would never have believed it. But you are two different people. I just spoke to someone who was very, this and this. And then you're like, it's warm all over the place. And I realized that there was such a huge disconnect that I was not aligning everyone who I am in one piece because I didn't feel it was safe enough to do that. I was still walking around with all these protections of having to prove something, proving something to others or proving something to myself. And I realized at that point, that was where the real work needed to start. And that was when I started working on how do I show up as me all the time consistently, regardless of the environment, regardless of where I am, regardless of the relationship. And that was really the moment that I said, I am not two different people. I need to just be me. So who am I and what does that look like? And that was really the question that started it all out. And I've been doing that ever since. So now I just pay attention to whether or not I am authentically showing up as me all the time. And that's what people are sticking to now. That's what's been my secret sauce.
I love that because I had exactly the same experience, and as I was listening to you, I think mine was in 2015 as well. I'm gonna reflect on that afterwards, which is a bit.
Well, that's about when you and I met, I think.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that's about when we started looking for other pieces.
Absolutely. So that's probably what attracted us, funnily enough.
Yep.
Because I had exactly the same experience where I was in my mind still living in a corporate space and having structure to my business and me as a leader. And then although mine wasn't driven by a conversation, it was driven by this this just seated need. Actually, something's missing. I'm not bringing my whole self to the party here. There's more to me. There's a personality, there's a sense of humor, there's all sorts, a little bit quirkiness that I'm not bringing that I really want. And that's when I decided unapologetically to show up and just be okay with me. And that's when things started to change.
And that's when things start to change. So, you and I are driven by that same passion of helping other people to see and understand and believe in their specialized skills. And that really is the magic that's going to help them define success in the way, however they define their success factors. Doesn't have to be what other people think are their success factors, but showing up with that alignment all the time. And it's not that easy. It often leads to a really big change. So it's not, you have to get very comfortable knowing that that's once you start to feel that disconnect, other people are going to pick up on it as well. It may result in a career change. It may result in having to do something different. It may result in changing, ending, or shifting relationships, and being very comfortable in what that looks like so that you can move forward without all that lingering stuff that sticks with letting go, right? So it's not easy, but it's worth it.
It really isn't easy. So let's talk about that process then, just in case anybody's listening that's feeling it or is going through it. Because one of the main players in this process is fear. Yeah.
Yes.
Discomfort, but really when we get to the nuts and bolts, it's that feeling of fear. So how do we tackle that? What would you say? How do we again lean into fear and know that it's okay and we're going to just feel it and get past that, rather than resist and run away from it?
So a couple of things that I have found helpful and that other people have, as I shared them or worked with them, have said the same thing, has to do with the fact that you just acknowledge that a change may or may not need to happen and just accept it. Like, you don't have to do anything with it yet. Just let the fact that you already recognize that something's feeling like it needs to change for you, and letting that sink in for some time. And then when you're ready, there's some questions you can ask yourself throughout the process where you just get yourself in a really clear space and you do your breathing and you need to, and you ask yourself as many questions as you can. And it's like taking a step back, right? And removing yourself from the situation itself and putting more of that that scientific lens head on, or putting it under a societal, microscope where you distance yourself a little bit, put that, the Wonder Woman, piece around you, or whatever that might be that you need to do to take a step back from the emotional piece and objectively ask yourself questions. And then get feedback from people who are within your network, who you feel are valid sources, who can provide you input about you without their own preferences and agendas for you, and then figure out if that matches what you're looking to do. So for example, some of the questions you might ask yourself that I have found helpful are things about the payoff and the cost, which is different than pros and cons. You ask yourself your pros and cons of a situation or decision, but that keeps it a bit more on the surface versus what are the payoffs and the costs if you do make the change, and what's the payoff if you don't make the change. Because if you have fear about making a change, and whatever you're doing right now is serving something, it's serving some childhood need, or serving a deeper, internal need, and you have to have patience with yourself and accept that you might need to do small changes, or you might not be ready for a change right now, and maybe it's you feel like you have to make a change but you're not really ready to make the change. So really giving yourself that patience to think through it. So what are the payoffs if you do? What are the payoffs if you don't? What are the costs if you do? What are the costs if you don't? And then digging in a little deeper about, if I make this change, what am I letting go of? Like, what do I lose if I make this change? What do I gain if I make this change? What do I lose if I don't? And, what are the consequences if I don't make this change? Where am I going to be in 5 years or 10 years? And where do I really want to see myself? And what are the things I have the most self-respect for? So where am I going to have the most self-respect at the end of these decisions, so that I can make these decisions not knowing what the outcome might be, but having some trust that you're making the best decision you can today. Where you are, your resources, your emotional state, have you slept enough, whatever that is for that day. And then you can always remember that you can make a different decision later. Like, don't get stuck in your own decisions. If they're self-imposed, then make a different decision. You give yourself permission to change your mind.
Yes.
And then communicate that to anyone else who needs to support it.
And that is such a key factor right there, giving yourself permission to change your mind.
Yes.
So often we get stuck and we think, actually, we've made a commitment, even if it's in our own head, we've made a commitment and we have to go down that road. But it's about allowing ourselves the space to change it and adapt and do something different if it's not working.
I agree. And that's the hardest part, because we're like, well, I said I was going to do this. Okay, well, then I'll just say I'm going to do something different, like switch it up. But also understanding that, are you switching it up because you're getting impatient and not giving it the time it needs? You have to really pay attention to what is your underlying reason for wanting to make a change or not making a change, and paying attention to where the openings are, and taking that be like water flow, right? Where the open space, if you run into a barrier, how do you go over it and around it and through it? And as long as you're moving and you're just not stagnant, then it could be a quiet trickle, or it could be a giant rush, but pay attention to your own energy levels with that.
And that again, that is so important, because often, especially here, in this day and age, we don't give ourselves the time and space to check in. We get busy, especially in our world, we from morning till night, we're on the go all the time, and it's just allowing yourself, giving yourself permission, as you've said, to stop, space, breathe, as you said, and check in. What is it that I really want? What's going on? And just seeing it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I agree, because the times to pull over, that power. I have a colleague who's doing some work around the power and the pause, and what that looks like in terms of giving yourself those moments to sit down and take that Maya Angelou approach to, sometimes all I need to do is take a moment to sit down and think. Or for me, I take a moment to take a walk. I'm very big on creative outlets and movement. So a lot of times when I'm working with someone or an organization and they're just completely stuck, or they can't figure out how to even get off the path they're on, and they're just living in the anxiety in the moment, I'm like, well, where's your creative outlet? Like, what is it that gets you creative? And for some people it's painting. For some people it's music. For some people it's getting on top of a mountain and hiking. For some people it's just stepping outside or getting on their yoga mat. For others it's just sitting with a book and a cup of tea. But where are your creative outlets, and where can you get it out? And then how can you use those creative outlets? So for me, when I get stuck, I take a walk and I just let things go, and I start having all these conversations. And when I unstuck, my hips get unstuck, and I can dance, or I can move, or I can walk, then all of a sudden, whatever I'm stuck on gets unstuck.
Yes. You're creating that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
take a walker every day. One of my rules is, I take the dog for a walk, and that's when everything just falls into place. Something that I teach is the power of 15 minutes. So even if you're stuck all day, you're back to back, you can't see any space for any time for yourself, that 15-minute block to do everything that you've just talked about, whether it's a walk or a quick hike or a bit of yoga or whatever it might be that does it for you, we can all find 15 minutes, can't we?
15 minutes. That's great.
Absolutely. So let's switch it up a bit then, and I want to do some quick fire questions for you, just
Sure.
to speak a little bit, and we'll talk about you rather than the work that we do. So would you say that you're a morning person or an evening person?
I would say that has significantly changed. So my answer today is not the same answer I would have given you 2 weeks ago, and it's actually something that I've been doing in my Juggling Priorities program that I teach. Has to do with the fact that I know for me, my preferred time of day has changed. It changes with the seasons, and it changes with my age, and it changes with my circumstances. So I have never been what I've considered myself a morning person. I like night. I like creativity. I like to be up late. If I could just sleep in and start my day at 9 or 10, then that seems lovely. But now, with where I am, I'm so excited about the work I'm doing that I find that if I'm up at 5:30, 6, 7 in the morning, and I get a huge chunk done by 9, it just feels so empowering for my day. So I get some movement in, I get some pieces done, I get a chunk done, and then I can make my coffee and I take my breaks around that 9 or 10. Completely different, and my internal clock is resetting. So that I'm now really excited about doing the morning stuff, which is very new for me.
Interesting. So you said, 2 weeks ago, you've shifted in just 2 weeks, just probably because you're more motivated. Your motivation's changed.
I was excited to get up in the day and knock some stuff off, and I'm working on projects and trainings and work with clients that I'm just so jazzed up about. And the idea of I can get up in the morning and start on these pieces, and I'm getting some sleep, and I'm able to get to bed earlier at night because I feel like my day's been fully accomplished and I've had some time, and then I get up in the morning and I'm just so ready to go. And it's such a difference. Such a difference. Yeah.
It is. I've been a night owl for pretty much all of my life. I love evenings. I can work happily till 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'm wondering whether one day that'll shift. Yeah,
unexpected.
I'll let you know, see what happens. So, what do you do in your free time? We've heard about dancing, walking. What do you get up to?
I do love to dance. So my free time, it depends on my energy level. So on where I am, sometimes I'm a very extroverted person, but I spend a lot of time my home's very quiet, and I also do a lot of downtime. So if I have downtime, sometimes I like to just be really quiet at home. I love to read. I'm not every once in a while I'll watch something, or a show or a TV piece, but it's not really as nurturing for me. So my downtime, I love to spend time with my family. I love to laugh with my friends. I have a 5.5-year-old nephew who is just pure joy. So running around at the zoo and having adventures to me is a huge amount of fun as well. And I just love to be outside as much as possible. So it just depends. And sometimes my downtime just involves just sitting and being in my space and talking on the phone with someone or reconnecting, or sometimes it's just being quiet, lying on my foam roller and stretching things out. And other times it's, hop on a plane and go do a little traveling. It's always rejuvenating for me.
So where have you been recently?
Most recently, my travels, I went to New Mexico. It's where my mom lives. So as I mentioned a few years ago, I put some roots down there. And whenever I'm going through something really big, I love to, so for me personally, I love to be on a mountain twice a year. I find that to be a great place for me to reconnect, get a little higher. I get a lot of clarity, and I bring that mountain energy back with me. So my last trip was out to New Mexico, and I hiked up the Sandia Peak, and I got to touch snow, which makes me very happy, even though it was anytime. I love snow in winter. So that was my last trip that involved a plane.
Have you got anything else booked?
Not yet. Right now, because my work's been so exciting in terms of where my focus is. My time right now is tying any of my travel to my work and to my business. So hopping on a plane to head out to the UK or somewhere to do some trainings is something that I would love to do. Have passport, willing to go anywhere. But most of my travel right now has been specific to where my clients have been, and I'm just looking to see where that organically opens up. So I'll still do something in the summer. I think something at some point will get me somewhere that's a little cooler that involves a mountain and a change of scenery.
Yeah, but it sounds like you've got that, that balance right in terms of just recharging your energy.
Yeah, you actually get out there once or twice a year. Sometimes I go through phases where things are international travel, and other times it's just seeing a different part of the country, and other times it's revisiting a place where I just love to go regularly and revisit it. So I like to see where the waves are. I've been fortunate too. I have a lot of friends who live in a lot of different places, either around the country or internationally. So my travel has sometimes been tied to where they live and their life events, right? Oh, I know. I'm going out to the West. I'm going out to Arizona this year, friend celebrations and life changes and bat mitzvah. So they're reasons why I tend to travel where my people are.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how do you keep yourself up to date in terms of your own personal development? Because in our world, it's so easy to put our own development last because we're so focused on something else. What do you do to keep yourself developed?
Well, I've got a couple different things. One, I'm of the mindset that if we're going to be effective practitioners and coaches, we also need to work with our own. So I have a coach that I've worked with for 6 years now, and I work with her monthly, if not more frequently as needed. And it's a very organic piece where it's not so structured, but we hop on the phone as needed. And she's got an energy worker background. So there's a lot of feeling in, and we do a lot of the self-development work that's tied to me showing up, as I said, that alignment and my authentic self all the time. So that's one thing I do. I'm surrounded by people who also are very big on ongoing self-development. So I make sure that we're constantly pushing ourselves. So if I say I feel like I'm good for right now, they're like, no, you need to bump that up to another level. So I have surrounded myself both personally and professionally with people who, when they see me starting to go, yeah, you're ready now, even when I'm like, I'm not ready yet, they're like, you're resisting, you're ready. And so those people who force me to bump myself up a level. So I've done that very purposefully because it's so easy to stay where we are and to let things ride out. And then to get ourselves bumped to the next level is having those external sources. I've also stayed very closely connected to my network. I have a really amazing network of people. I'm constantly expanding it. So I'm always connecting to other people anywhere who are looking to facilitate positive, necessary change. And they'll have an idea for collaborations, and I have an idea, and then we just all work on stuff together in addition to just my own thing. So a lot of my own development, professionally and personally, comes from the people who I connect with on a daily basis. I've got a call after this with someone new who we connected with on LinkedIn, and we are just going to talk about what we do and what our background is and how we might collaborate together, and we just go after things. Absolutely. So it's an ongoing journey.
So important, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, Erica, because it is, again, easy to get stuck in terms of your relationships and the network, but rather than really look for people that are like-minded, but also that will be able to push you and spot when you're getting stuck or you're resisting, so they can start pushing you. So how did you find your people? When people are struggling with that, maybe they work for an organization and they're surrounded by the same people every single day, and they think, well, actually, where do I find these people from? What would you recommend? What do you think?
Well, so in the healthcare practitioner world, like my coaches or healthcare practitioners, and where that looks like, I've connected a lot of them through my sister. So my sister has a very intuitive way of approaching life. And so she's got me connected to a lot of those practitioners. And I just learned to stop resisting. Now she says, this would be good for you. I just listen right away. So that's one source. My other sources is that I was very fortunate with the graduate degree that I got at Penn is in organizational dynamics. And I stayed very closely connected as a network. I guest speak in the classes. They brought me back to speak at pieces. I've stayed very strongly connected to new students coming in, to the work that they do. I support their pieces. They support mine. I stay connected with the professors. They present at conferences that they host. So that's a huge place with my network. And when I'm running a training, I reach out to them and invite them to come in. So that's one way. I mentioned I'm a bit extroverted. So I'm really connected to a lot of the networking organizations here. Another place where I've stayed connected with people is, let's say I've interviewed with a client or I've interviewed for a position and that didn't turn out to be the path I'm on, but I've stayed connected to the people I met in the journey, the recruiters, the change management leads, and we've stayed connected because that outcome was just as valuable as whether that work would have really fit me or not, maybe not, but the people that came out of it and those connections stuck. So I'm always looking for those. I pay attention to the things that stick.
Yeah.
And I put myself in a lot of environments. So whether I'm speaking in an environment and then who sticks with me afterwards, whether I'm going to different events that my clients are hosting and I meet people through that, I'm constantly looking for the opportunities to stay engaged.
And that's the key right there, isn't it?
Yes.
Just look for them. Start putting your head above the parapet and start looking, thinking outside the box. Not being afraid of connecting on social media or, going to networking events. You can reach out and that's where the magic is.
It is.
We've connected. We've never met face to face, but we've chatted and
mm-hmm.
we're on the other side of the world. And you just never know. You just never know where
it's true.
It's going to lead. So
it's true.
What's the quote? You're a sum total of the 10 people that you spend most of your time with. So
right.
Just look for those people that are just going to stretch you. Such a valid point. So if you had to choose, and this is going to be a difficult one now. I don't know if I knew this question, I'd be like, if you had to choose just 3 skills and let all the others go for a leader nowadays, what would it be? Looking at the current challenges that we've got, and what would it be? Just 3 skills.
Focusing on people's strengths. And looking at ways to build upon them. That to me is one of the most critical skills right now. And which means you have to know what their strengths are, and so do they. So focusing on the strength-based decisions are really important. Flexibility. In today's day and age, everything is moving so fast and people have a ton of information being thrown at them from all sources. So that flexibility in shifting gears and taking a more agile approach to change management where you're working in sprints, you check in and you let go of what that looks like. So that flexibility. And the third would be only 3. You're right. This is tough. I would say really building up that skill on how to give and receive feedback in a way that doesn't put people on the defense, doesn't put people in the offense, and is really aligned with a more data-informed perspective so that we can help people, ourselves and the others, whether we're getting the feedback or giving the feedback, ensuring that it really is a source of data that uncovers people's preferences, that uncovers people's priorities, that uncovers people's beliefs, which is why it's so wildly important. And at the same time, learning how to filter it out so we can determine whether or not that feedback needs to ding us and sting us and is an opportunity for growth, or whether or not it's just a reflection of the other person's priorities and preferences and maybe we don't have to do anything with it. But there's so much richness in really using feedback as a very purposeful and valuable tool, being on both sides of that piece. So whether it's, I'm working with the school system right now on feedback in terms of parents and students and colleagues and each other. I do that work with my clients. I do the work with my family. Like I've done it for me. And what does that look like in terms of, do I need to make a career change? Is this organization the right fit? Is this the right relationship? Is there something I need to be doing differently because I'm not serving my own purpose because I'm getting in my own way? And there's so many things you can do with feedback. So I would say that's a huge skill that I see right now.
Yeah,
it helps with a lot of the people stuff.
Yeah, I agree. What
Those are my 3. Yeah.
What skill didn't quite make it then? What would have been number 4?
The energy management around how we spend our time.
Ooh.
And
what do you mean?
So everyone talks about time management.
Yeah.
But what I tend to find sticking with people when I'm working on either through clients or through training is that you're not really managing your time. Time's a bit of a thing, right? So that question you asked me about what time of day, are you a morning person or a night person? Our preference times a day are the times when we can get the most done, but it's also the time where we're really good at making justifications and excuses on why we don't get things done. So for me, it's really about, at the end of the day, if you can figure out a way to manage your priorities and approach things with very concrete strategies on how to take that project management approach to your time and your day, using your calendar, using your email, using your processes. At the end of the day, it's really about managing your energy. How drained do we want to be? What can we do so we walk out of a meeting and we feel I'm good and I'm motivated, and it ties into productivity, versus I walk out, I'm so exhausted, forget the conversation with my kid, the homework, the whatever at the end of the day, and I'm so exhausted. All I want to do is avoid everything, watch a bunch of TV, drink my wine, and not sleep because I don't want the next day to start. So it really is, to me, about managing our energy. And it's the same with, to me, where the companies are having the most successes are helping those 15-minute breaks, as you said, to tie those things in a priority, to make sure people are getting their movement and their creativity in. So that would have been my fourth one. And that was where I was going back and forth between feedback and
That's
energy
I
management.
could see that thought process, that struggle. And
Yeah.
I'm the same, but I'm so pleased that I kind of asked that question, because your last answer is my playground. It's where I spend
Mm.
a lot of that's my soapbox, if you like. I could talk about that all day long, and I do, just have that. It's not so much about managing your time, but managing yourself and managing that space and how you utilize it.
It is.
Mindset around time. But yeah, I could talk about that forever. But I'm glad
Same.
you mentioned it.
Same.
So,
And it's sticking. Yeah. And companies and the organizations I talk to, out of all the things I have, they're like, we want that one. We want that one. I mean, that's been a consistent piece, because everyone's struggling with it and everyone's tired of being tired, and they're tired of feeling so busy that they just can't keep up with the demands that are coming on, and they're just exhausted, and people are just tired of being tired.
yeah, and my why, the reason that I get up every single morning is that's just unacceptable. Life's just too short to be exhausted
Yes.
with your kids, or to hike that mountain, or do whatever you want to do in your spare time. So
Yep.
yeah, it's my soapbox. This is where I like to chat. So I'm very conscious of our time. Yeah, I know you've got, with the time difference, you've got a full day ahead. I'm at the end of my day. So one last question then.
Sure.
What book would you say you would
Hmm.
recommend to everybody? Now, I know you're a reader. I'm a massive reader. What is it? What's the one book that you think, if you do nothing, grab this book, read this one?
I would say that one of my favorite go-to books, if people are not already connected to it, is Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The reason why I love this book so much is because he really talks about starting with yourself first. And that to really do change management or facilitate change, and I always do it as positive and necessary change, is starting with yourself first. But then how does that translate into companies? How does that translate into teams? And the habits he talks about are very connected to everything you and I touched about on today, with some very clear strategies on how to do that. So how do you facilitate those changes for yourself? And then how do you do it there? And it's really simply well written. And it to me, it translates into every environment. It translates into education, into government, into personal coaching. It translates into business and into corporate and into finance. And it's just about effective people. And it doesn't matter what your pay grade is or how long you've been with your company or your organization. It's really just about you as a person. And you have a lot more control over being effective than you think, regardless of the environment you're in. So, Stephen Covey.
Great recommendation.
Love him.
Love it. And what I love about him and his work is that you will be, once you've read the book, you will be quoting him forever and a day, because
Always.
as you go along, you'll think, oh, actually, that's a habit, and that's a habit. So
it is.
Get the book. Definitely good recommendation.
Yes.
Erica, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Sure. This is super fun.
Super fun. Yeah, and if you do, decide to wave that passport and come over here, We need to do it face to face.
I think it'll happen.
I think it'll happen too. But thanks so much.